need for.
Good.
Thank goodness.
I only did that 3 times.
The next block of comments really don't necessarily have to do with the documents themselves, but really how they're used in a practical way. Generally by Karen or whoever in the future will be the zoning administrator. But it's certainly still, everything ends at Karen, right? So and that's shown in the document in some pretty specific places, you know, section 200 zoning permits and how the town goes about making sure that all of those comply with with the goals the town is trying to achieve. So a lot of that work will happen after this process. And that's, you know, creating a process for application for review, and then for town review, and then for DRB, the DRB process. One of Pip's comments is that sometimes meetings can be cumbersome, and I don't doubt that at all. Especially given the importance or the weight that that Putney in the past, and many towns in Vermont have placed on the use of conditional use permits, CPs. Most uses that aren't single or two-family residential or interact with the conditional use permit criteria in some form or fashion, generally speaking. And that's not good for the zoning administrator, it's not good for the DRB, it's not good for applicants generally. And usually it's not necessary. And I think as there's an emphasis, certainly at the state level, right? It's the kind of the planning touchstone is, you know, compact village center is surrounded by, you know, rural and agricultural uses. You know, that needs to come. I think those can be loosened, and we certainly have done that in this document, and that's you can see that in section 330, which is a new section. That's the use matrix,
Which you actually, in your packet is a nice presentation of that, which is a way, I just wanted to point that out because this is a nice summary of how to present it to the public. This has a before and after look in it. So I just want to make sure you've seen a version of this before. Mike developed something like this back in June. He's a little updated now.
So some of the use profiles within the zone districts that have been changed. I don't think it's anything, you know, wild or, you know, generally objectionable, and
right,
pretty well based in, you know.
Well, Mike, did you get any comments, Mike, in this last round on that, or like it was just kind of quiet?
About the uses themselves?
Yeah, about the uses.
Surprisingly quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what you put on the table for the district uses and requirements, really, it was more about, can we see, Doug's comment, what's different in the table, because the table showed everything is new. But that's why you now have this table, which shows just what's new. But so I just, in terms of other big picture things, you know, what are some things that are there issues that need a little more attention? So for example, there was an issue about in subdivision, non-conforming lots and how to handle those. And that was a topic that came up that we haven't really discussed, I don't think, at this table before.
You mean section 300?
Yeah.
So in the zoning.
Yeah, in the zoning.
Section 300.6 basically gives property information that own property that straddle different zone districts an opportunity to subdivide their property, essentially creating more non-conforming lots. And that, there was a conversation about it a couple of Fridays ago. And I think that's gonna be going away. The rationale being, it's already non-conforming, should be able to create additional non-conformity. Typically, the more you want to avoid that, you go subdivisions, but non-conformities are not great. And certainly, it's a recommendation of the process to go to a parcel-based zoning map, so that you don't have parcels that are in more than one district, right? So it gives surety and clarity to property owners, to potential applicants, developers, whomever.
Just to clarify, that's a future goal.
Right.
As a future.
We're not going to do that here, right? We looked at that back in the fall and decided that was going to be too hard.
And that will support eliminating that particular regulation.
Issue, yeah.
So. Expanding on maps, I'm sure Chris will go into it here shortly. There are references to various maps, various other documents within zoning and subdivision both. Some of which just don't exist anymore. Since the last time the zoning or that section even was updated, maybe the documents called something else. So being consistent in that way will also be helpful to potential applicants and property owners as they seek to develop their property as they see.
Mhm.
I'll have to go further into that. In one of the issues early on, more so, and I think that's already, this is maybe already taken care of, is we wanted to give folks flexibility on how they use their properties and when they use their properties. Wanted to make sure that in times of maybe crisis for those folks, that they have every opportunity to continue to use their property, as they see fit. So I believe that has been taken care of. I
Mhm.
gave me comments on it. It was in the last half, so that was good. I thought. And then, let's see.
What other comments, what other things came up in the comments that you received?
I think overwhelmingly it's consistency within across the documents.
Yeah.
By far.
Yeah.
Trying to further explain what a subdivision plat is.
Right.
Things like that. So that'll be my main task moving forward, is rereading both of them, just making sure that even though it makes sense to me, it might not make sense to a property owner. And that's my challenge.
And from two very different sources, very different time frames.
Yes.
The initial zoning has been tweaked, I think, the late 70s, 80s model that a lot of other towns in this area have.
Yep.
And then the subdivision reg was a model reg that was provided by WRC. And I don't know what its original origins were, but certainly much more contemporary.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Children of two different
right
parents.
And the adoption, for example, of the matrix for current use district, the matrix table for district uses, and eliminating a whole lot of verbiage that tried to describe that was a really good improvement. And I don't think anybody's saying anything but good on that. That's a good change. So I don't know if there's are there any other sort of issues that would change things in a significant way, or is it mainly just make it work better? Is the comments that you received, other than this one about the section 336?
By far make it work better.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not even really close, which is maybe not that surprising.
Yeah. Pip, any comments or questions from
Noted
you?
with this sort of acknowledgement that it's not easy to read the state enabling legislation, but it just is the way it is, and it has to be sort of carefully structured for legal reasons. And yeah, it's not so easy to read zoning regs. If you do read a few of them, there's a real consistency to the outline structure of them, and you begin to see the similarities and the differences. But it's challenging to think of it as a user-friendly document if you're not willing to sort of jump in. But that there is always the presence of the zoning administration staff to facilitate the relationship between an applicant and the regs. That's what the zoning office is there for.
Yeah, and I'm going to thank Rai, who who really dug into this issue of how do we make the document more accessible to people, and a number of recommendations about where to put definitions, how to have internal references to other things so people would know where the heck to look for something, which is, of course, the zoning administrator would help with that, but it is really nice when you're reading it to say, so where would I find about that, when there's some of these references. Anyway, thank you, Rai, for your careful review. That is a really good, helpful perspective. Anything else, Mike, you wanted to call out? We're going to come to forest blocks in a bit because that's where a lot of comments were also. But beyond that, is there anything else you wanted to bring to our attention, so that mainly you're just improving the readability of the document and probably eliminating the section about subdivision of non-conforming?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be going back through the entire document and just gonna rereading it, making sure that that's achieved for sure. One of the things that struck me about the process overall was it's really tempting sometimes when you redo comprehensively a zoning ordinance to try to legislate every single possible outcome that you can think of. And that's dangerous. I mean, there's gonna be, for every application is unique, and I was, I'll applaud everyone here about, allowing for that interpretation to happen organically over time. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Doug, did you have a comment?
I don't intend to go line by line, but I have a couple questions, things I don't quite understand. Generally, the red indicates a change.
Right, yeah.
So if there's a red P, does that mean it used to be a C? For example.
Or something
yeah.
else.
Or something like 3-family and multi-use. It's
Yeah.
a red P. What was it before?
It would, if it was red P now, it would either have been a C or nothing.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if it's important that the people that are gonna approve this need to know those changes, what they were before and what they are now. In other words, put a strike through what it used to be.
Mhm.
And then a couple other things like office, we have 3 different office categories. And you have a P under village residential. This is a question I have about village and village residential. An office less than a certain size is permitted in the village residential. And an office is permitted in the village. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, the size, obviously, in the village residential, it's much considered a less dense.
So in the village residential, it has to be less than 2,500 square feet.
Yeah.
Where is the village residential relative? I've never quite understood that.
There's a
It's-
district
It's a very
map.
clear demarcation if you look at the zoning.
I haven't looked at it, so I'm just a
Top of
verbal.
Kimball Hill.
Hmm.
Top of Kimball Hill, roughly.
So up
That's what
there,
village
you're
is.
going to.
Top of Kimball, yeah, that's where the demarcation is.
It's the southern end of the village residential district, and it runs up,
Like the central school.
yeah, a little before the central school, I think. And roughly parallels, Westminster.
So the bottom line is, in that particular area, an office smaller than 2,500 square feet is allowed. An office of any size is allowed where I live in the village. Any size.
Or in the multiple use.
So I'm just wondering why there's no restriction as to. And there's other places where they talk about 30,000 square feet, whatever. So I'm a little confused as to something that's not clear, like office. How does somebody read that? But a title company come in with their plant and real estate and all that stuff and have, 25 people working there in a building that's 5,000 square feet.
It does seem like the line 48 and 49 could be pushed together.
Yeah, it could be that I just took that from the spreadsheet, so maybe that's an error, because I was looking a little weird, I'm gonna agree.
But
No,
so
I
there's,
just think they can be squished together because
We're just making, there's a distinction being made between. Actually, it's establishing a maximum.
A maximum and a minimum. yeah.
2,500 square feet for an office in the village residential district. And,
no such size limitation impacts the village or the multi-use district.
so in village residential, if you have an office of greater than 2,500 square feet, it's a conditional use. That's the distinction. I mean, you have to sit with this for a little while. It took me a minute to just read it. Okay, so that's the distinction. An office of less than 2,500 square feet, you can go through the various districts. It's permitted in only village residential. That doesn't mean to say that in the village, you couldn't put an office less than 2,500 square feet. It's just not a size category that they even worry about.
so I'm still a little confused. Where I live at 88 Main Street, is that village or village residential?
It's village.
Village.
Oh, yeah.
So in the village, you could have an office of any size. Permitted, but no, unconditional.
I mean, subject to the development standards of the lot that you're trying to build on.
Right, setback standards, all that kind of thing.
I mean,
And
there's
height standards.
building height. sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna get it.
Okay.
In
I
terms
see.
of
Thank
square
you.
feet. You have a
Yeah.
30,000 square feet
If,
warehouse of some sort.
well, it's not a
That's
warehouse,
someplace
it's an
else.
office, because the warehouse has a different set of requirements.
Yeah, I know that's someplace else. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
bring that up,
Yeah.
but. So I just, so I'm a little unclear. It's just me. And if maybe it's explained someplace. The other one was, childcare. There's three different.
Okay, just a
categories.
moment, I want to note that Rye has their hand up, right? We just, maybe they want to comment here.
Yeah, I actually, I was also curious about just the sizing of things, mostly just because, I was reading an article about Amazon trying to jump in to Vermont and have a warehouse. And we are, very close to the highway and we don't have a lot of spaces that would be big enough for a crazy Amazon warehouse, but I wanted to think about how we want to zone that for either making that more or less possible legally, as times move on there, and more big businesses are going to be moving around more and more. Anyway,
There are conditional uses in the village and the village residential warehouses, up to 30,000 square feet. And they are not permitted in the rural residential resource or conservation. And it's a
Yeah.
conditional use in the multi-use district, which is sort of down River Road.
yep.
That's the control. And then there is a maximum. I mean, there's a 30,000 square foot maximum for warehouse.
Okay.
Does anybody have a number in their head of how big Basketville is?
6,000, 10,000.
It's a little bit small.
Smaller than 30,000.
30,000 seems really huge.
And
It might,
it's just a guess.
30,000 is 3/4 of an acre.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Two great minds here thinking 10 is not that guess.
they,
I'm not again, is right on that.
I just want, right, is there something else you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to toss it out there because I was reading about it and I was like, that would be a disaster. Let's not do that.
Yeah, that's right.
So just to comment on Rye, or to follow up, I'm not against big business and big buildings and things as long as they don't bring in a lot of traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Because I live where all the traffic is. But I think we need large employers.
Mm-hmm.
An Amazon or an AT&T or a call center or something where they have money coming in to support dozens of employees doing simple tasks that refugees can do, or people that just graduated from Landmark, for example, that need a job. Lots of spots where money's coming in from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be an office that's 5,000 square feet with a lot of cubicles doing what they do in Maharashtra. Answer phones. Indians can answer phones, Afghanis can answer phones here in our town. we're gonna need more employment. That goes into the comprehensive plan. So as in terms of 30,000 square feet, that's a little over the top. But I do think we need to allow provisions, and maybe this is in the conditional use in the,
Mhm.
what do you call it, the standalone, what do you call it? Not
Well, there's
bylaw.
the conditional use review,
Yeah.
sets what would be
Ordinance is what I
appropriate.
was thinking, ordinance, whatever is on the out, on this, aside from these, that explains what are the criteria for conditional use, would sort of narrow that down as what we're looking for. What do we want to encourage to come?
The criteria, sorry, it's all of a piece. The conditional use review is outlined explicitly in the zoning because it's a zoning review process. So, when it says conditional in here, that's referring specifically to the conditional use review process, which is in the regs. And you could read the evaluation that the DRB will do in conditional use. We don't have a lot of wiggle room because it's copied directly from the enabling legislation.
So I haven't read that, I'll admit that, so I should go back and read that.
Yeah, I mean, that for me is maybe we should have, it's hard to talk about this structure of these regulations when you haven't been through the process. But, is it worth taking 2 or 3 minutes to just go through this, or is this not a good time?
I'm not sure that we need to do that. I think Doug sounds like he is satisfied to understand that the conditional use review has a process and criteria associated with it. That was your question. It is articulated in here. What you have here is a summary table, Doug, which was an attempt to try to show more readily what's different, and your comment about strikeouts is a good one.
So one other thing, just sort of, you have the high tops of the grades here. Childcare facility and, there's 2 or 3 other references to that. Have different size categories.
That's right, they do. And then conditional comes in depending. Yeah,
So the one that doesn't have a small, and then I can't find where it is now.
Childcare facility is the largest one. and
it's on,
There's not enough.
What number is it?
it's on table 2,
Oh,
page 1,
childcare, here it is. So we have home, small, and
and then
facility.
facility.
So home, again, that's your house, and it's a red peat, that means it used to be conditional. Or
Oh,
didn't
you-
exist.
Or didn't even exist.
Didn't exist. Small means, again, either it didn't exist or it was conditional before. So it's small and then any size, and then facility, what's that mean?
The facility is the any size.
What's
There's
Oh,
childcare
home-
facility, small, that's.
home, small, and
Okay.
facility? Got it.
And they're defined in the text.
Got it, I got
Yeah.
it.
That comes directly from the state.
Yeah, this is marrying with the borrowing the state is
I
doing.
just wasn't, I was trying to figure this, appreciate it.
And you had a comment?
This is just reacting to Ryan's comment. Do we have, I just haven't been through the zoning lately, do we have anything in it that like we don't want big box stores or something? Why do I have this in my brain?
That would be more appropriate for the town plan,
Yeah.
to have a,
Okay.
an
The
overarching
answer is
statement
no.
like that.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about the types of businesses we want here and what that town plan talks
that's
about
fine.
that.
I just.
So,
it's in
yeah.
my mind that they need this.
For what it's worth, I do think the bylaw supports that vision.
Could I do an editing thing? A very small but important editing thing?
Yes, it's,
On page 22, or line 22, cemetery is spelled with all E's.
oh.
Since I used to live on Cemetery Road, it's a funny thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, age. Line
Line
Yes,
22.
seven.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, line 22.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Anne. No, this is, I mean, this is why it's important to just hear from people about things. So any other questions you have, otherwise I think, Mike, you've got basically, I think, I want to just check, is there support for the public review draft, which is not proposed yet, to basically reflect the things that Mike has talked about here? Adam.
Seems like the appropriate time. It was the waiver section gives the applicant an opportunity to get a waiver for dimensional standards. Is there the common of is there precedent for waivers for some of the development standards?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
Would would the waiver section allow you to get a waiver on parking or?
and where's that got it's for dimensional requirements.
Well, I thought it was restricted to dimensional requirements by enabling legislation. So,
A waiver two dimensional.
yeah, and I'd have
That
to
reads to
reread
me-
that.
That reads to me as setbacks and
Yeah.
Right,
and height, but not some of the development standards in terms of.
Like what?
Some of the other sections.
the needle, the development standards with setbacks and such, but parking, no.
Parking is, you'll see the the table about parking.
We're not having, see there, so section 6 here. Got pattern circulation. These are all inside. here.
This would be improved by
Yeah,
noting the section.
Or
Pointed.
But
you can
parking
get,
standard would not be. I would say, get this on the DRB. I would say it should not be like landscaping or parking.
If the issue about a waiver came up, I would reread the enabling legislation. I think I read it like 6 weeks ago. I'm pretty sure it's pretty explicit in its restriction to dimensional standards, but I'd have to reread it.
that's how.
We haven't
So-
had a request for a waiver yet since the waiver enabling legislation was adopted by the state. So the town of Putney has.
That is
considered.
Is it allowed, because the way it reads, it sounds like it's for the strictly dimensional standards. So maybe people wouldn't ask.
Is there a waiver for anything else? Parking.
So
Would have the section terms.
the variance process would be. What you're referring to.
Exactly, and variances are nearly impossible, really.
Yeah, that, we have issued variances in the past. I guess they're going to review them, maybe the statutes of limitation have passed, but I thought that some of them were barely meeting the requirements.
For what it's worth, I reviewed thousands of variance applications and you can approve any of them or you can deny any of them. All about how you are looking at the application, really. So,
Well, my
in
understanding
this
is,
case, they're very-
is that the state enabling legislation, 4469, was very stringent with variances. Very difficult to check all the boxes and say, yes, I need this, especially there's one that the unnecessary hardship has not been created by the appellant. And it's like, you could put your garage over here, but you really think you need to put your garage here, and you want a variance for it. Well, you're asking for the variance for something that is your choice. By choice. So the waiver, I understood that to be a slightly relaxed set of requirements. But I still think it's all dimensional.
And the question remains, is there other instances where it relates to the performance standards or landscaping or parking? I'm not, but it's always imagined.
But I would say, like you couldn't say, I wanna have a parking space that is shorter or thinner than, not, it's for setbacks, for height, lot coverage, that.
All right, any other discussion about this? This is all about where the flexibility is, waivers,
I
Yeah.
think this speaks to how they're interpreted.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's conditional use, which depends. So,
In general, the revisions are good. I see all the flexibility, but the addition of conditional uses into the
Yeah.
matrix is really all is what I would be looking for as an applicant, just to go before a board and say, you know, here's something that's. We think fits, it meets these criteria.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you achieve that here.
Yeah.
That's-
And there's a lot more permitted uses, so
Yeah.
it's, yeah, in addition, so,
And again, in enabling the DRB to do its job. So many towns, the typical. The typical process is the DRB is just hamstrung by the code.
Yeah.
They're all their, you know, they're getting a chance to say, well, that works, that doesn't.
I think one of the big issues is this document, if adopted, would put much more workload on the zoning administrator. They're doing a lot of administrative reviews and.
yeah. And I think that's partly also for the DRB to be really available for the things that maybe a broader view is needed, right? A judgment is needed. And we'll talk more about that a little bit in a few minutes about the Forest Black overlay district, but what else you got, Mike?
That's all I got. I gotta change cemetery and use matrix.
Yeah.
Should be done.
Two instances, the other is line 24.
And I also think that in this presentation to the public about this use table, Doug's point to be able to do strikeout to show what was, in some cases, there was nothing because it's new. So you can't show a strikeout, but we can improve that.
But you do have it here in that you have the original version.
Right, we do.
And then in the new, so if you compare one to the other.
That's how we were trying to do it, to not clutter it too
no,
much.
It's there.
Okay, great.
That's what I was looking
It does
for.
get unruly.
Yeah.
Wanted to see the changes. So you've done it.
Yeah, visually it can be a lot. So, Pip, it was meant, Mike mentioned this mapping. It sounds like, Andrew, you have an insight.
Oh, I was trying to figure out. Average sizes of retail businesses. A Dollar General runs 7,500 to 9,000 square feet. So within our zoning bylaws, it would actually be a permitted use within the multi-use district.
Uh-huh.
And then things like a Tractor Supply is like. What was the magic number on Tractor Supply? It was 16 to 19,000 square feet.
Mhm.
So that would be a conditional use
Mhm.
in our village. Village residential or multi-use district. In case folks were wondering what the. How our zoning bylaws would interact with an application for one of those retailers.
That's amazing information that I didn't think to look up, and it's great, because when this was done initially, some of these were generic numbers provided to us by planners, but some were the planning commission that existed at that time's evaluation of buildings that we knew the size of in Putney. Like, we knew that at that time, the Putney Co-op was 4,000 square feet, and it became a touchstone, being like, okay, that, I can imagine that, and, you know, double it, well, depends on where, you know, what, so that sort of stuff. And I think we also knew what Basketville was, including the other side of the road at that time. But were you around for this when we were doing that? Your sister was.
I wasn't there. I did look up, Basketville footprint was between 12 and 13,000.
Okay.
We're too far off it.
Yeah, I mean, I had asked the question to Pip when we were talking about that warehousing, like, where did these magic numbers come from? Where, you know, where did the cap at 30,000 square feet, which seems to be the cap that's carried through this whole document? You know, is that
Yeah.
from state enabling legislation? Is that, something that,
No,
it sounds
I think-
like
Yeah, that
there was
was
some brainstorming that happened at one point?
I think WRC
Yeah.
guidance and then us imagining some of these parcels. But it's not a bad exercise to think of some of those more contemporary retail uses and their size. It's amazing we didn't get that average size from Google, you know, that the AI knows, and just see whether it feels consistent. So the issue with a conditional use is, you then could look at the conditional use criteria and see whether you felt that they would be stringent enough to have a basis for, making a determination about the appropriateness of a retailer like that. And they are controversial. When Walmart, when the great fear was that a Walmart was coming to every town, there were plenty of people who were really hoping that they would get a Walmart.
Right.
You know, so it isn't like they're, you know, they're the enemy for every citizen in every community. You know, it's very challenging to know what's right. So it's more fabric and size and appropriateness
Well,
of scale.
I think it's important to have this inquiry also. I mean, I don't know that we have a magic crystal ball here about what's coming, but we're all hoping something happens downtown by the former paper mill and that whole area. And so we want to be sure that our zoning provides the right kind of guidance, you know, again, aligned with our town plan about what we want in the village. But not to necessarily exclude anything that because we just haven't thought about it, that might be appropriate, but that's certainly worth thinking about a little bit more. What's that?
The paper mill wouldn't be allowed currently coming back now. would it?
I don't see it as an industrial use, so.
Resource industries as conditional uses,
You know,
yeah, but I would think it would fall short, you know, with site plan issues. You know, but with-
Yeah. I think that's
It's a conditional use of all of our districts.
mhm. Resource
A
industry.
resource industry may not be the definition of the paper mill. That could be- Yeah, yeah, so the paper mill.
Also,
Anyway.
consider that an applicant always has the option to plan district as well.
That's a very.
And almost surely that's what would happen at the,
Good point.
I would imagine.
So we do have a pathway for that to be considered in a holistic way. Yes, it's good. All right, it's 7:40. Unless there's anything else, I want to just, Pip, give you a moment to just visit. You had this map memo. I think you just need to sort of clarify what you did, what you found at a high level, not all the details, but why you did this and what you found.
I did this just to verify and checking with WRC about the maps that are referenced in zoning. So I just went through the document and looked for areas where there was talk about a map. And there's a zoning map, we have one adopted in 2007. It's paper, what's interesting here is this transition to digital mapping. You know, there's a reference in our reg that I think we should revise, that the paper copy was the copy and it was signed by the select board and the chair of the planning commission. Great to have a paper copy, but I think the real copy exists digital, or digital masters as well as a paper copy. So, Connecticut River shoreland, we have an overlay district, 500 feet from the river. It's not shown on any mapping. We could talk about spending the money to try to get that on mapping, but you can go to any map and scale off 500 feet and begin to see what that buffer is. And it does default to the core zoning administrator to provide that boundary when asked. Yeah, we think of most of these mapping, but you could go on the ground and begin to pull a tape. Similar stuff, we have overlay districts for rare plants and animals, significant natural communities. It's A&R mapping, it changes. There is no definitive paper map, it's a digital database. And it's one that's available to the public on A&R Atlas. Wellhead protection areas are indicated on the A&R Atlas. We have a reg that addresses that. I had some questions about it and have a call into a woman at the stage who's reviewing our reg, may have a recommendation, but it's not a time critical issue. It's something that if we choose to make some changes, we can do at any point in the future. And the flood hazard area are federal maps that we've incorporated, also some state mapping for the fluvial erosion issues, river corridor issues. And those maps exist in paper in Karen's office, but the definitive map, I would say, is a digital map. So a lot of this mapping is now kind of less important than it used to be because of the robustness of the data layers available with GIS mapping systems.
Question. Our shoreland reg references the mean high water mark of the Connecticut River. Is that something that exists? Measuring 500 feet on the ground as well as on a map is incredibly easy.
Yeah,
Now, those are
Defining-
different- those will get you two different numbers, so. On the map is horizontal and on the,
Sure.
on the point tape is a different.
But could be corrected for horizontal.
It's probably worth being specific whether it's horizontal.
Oh, you mean in the reg, yeah, I could understand that. But then also, like, is the mean high water mark of the Connecticut River a defined thing?
probably not.
Because that could also be, I mean, those two things combined together could make it really hard to interpret our shoreland reg to any
Well,
degree of accuracy.
Mike, if you want to take that under advisement, and
I've looked into it a little bit, and talked to Margot in our office. And she promised me she would come up with
Okay.
something that's already mapped, by the state.
Yeah, maybe not a mean high water, but a mapped down.
Sure, something that is.
is there is a Vermont border, because the Vermont border is the river and should not change.
That's
It
right.
could
From the river, for instance. Yeah, so I don't know how that works, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when you turn on lakes and streams and rivers in the A&R map, there is a layer that displays those objects. I don't know how, I imagine that was determined through pixel analysis as opposed to anything else.
But that would be a simple and consistent measure to do both the 50-foot or the river corridor, if you just use the same reference for whatever the A&R river layer is.
We're supposed to talk about this tomorrow morning.
that'd be great, yeah, so.
Great.
Was this shoreline reg also the one that the complicated measure of slope? Is that?
Yeah, that then disappeared.
Okay.
That reg.
Okay. We made it better. Which, it used to have
Yeah.
another layer of possible to interpret.
Yeah.
That-
Language.
This is good to take into consideration. You know, there's so much in the reg, you just start skimming at some point and you don't, parse
Right.
every single statement.
Well, to that, I wanted to raise another issue because steep slopes made me remind, do we have a definition of steep? That was a conversation we had at one point, is to have to,
Definition.
for steep slopes.
You have a request, Mike, that you've heard from me many times and reminded at the last meeting. We've got to get a steep slope rail. So if it isn't in your upcoming, version. Yeah,
Yeah, and I sent a comment just today, so probably you haven't had a chance to look at it. Both Shrewsbury's steep slopes, and it is exactly what the steep slopes that are mentioned in the town plan, which is 20%.
It's pretty typical, 20 to 25, yeah.
And our town plans have to say steep slopes of 20%. And so theirs is also, so almost. Anyway, that's.
but there's been an expectation that this,
Right.
a steep slope section will be included in the rails. I don't mean to be sure, but I really have. The time, I just looked at this spot.
So you
I
can
was-
build on the steep slope, you can't put anything permanent there, and then it says the driveway getting there should not be greater than 50%. And a slope going up, which I would appreciate greatly, because I doubt I'll find anyone.
Did you copy
my
my
driveway, which is like this.
Did you copy Mike?
Oh, yes,
Good, okay, then you're.
so it should be there.
So that may be a good model.
And Adam, you had something to say?
I feel quite strongly about steep slope regulation, and you might guess where I land on it. And that is that 20% is definitely not a steep slope. That is 1 and 5, 1 foot and 5. So the slope 1 foot higher than the end of the table, that would be considered a steep slope. I've seen 25, I've seen 33%. 33% is a 3-to-1 slope, so 3 feet and run, and 1 foot of rise. That's considered easily mowable on a riding lawnmower. That's a 3-1 slope is an engineering standard. A walkout basement is, across a 24-foot. You eliminate all those houses that have walkout basements would be built on prohibitive slopes.
I mean, they go from first floor to basement over the width of a 24 foot.
Exactly, where you typically enter on one side and walk out the other side. That's a, I can't do the math quickly, but 24 is 8 feet. Right, it's a, you don't even get 8 feet of rise over that.
Mhm.
The secondary problem is how do you measure steep slope? And we go back to the mapping, the LiDAR mapping and stuff, but you would still say, over a 50-foot section, over a 20-foot section, you have such irregularity.
You need to have a decision made about the length of area that you're determining the slope across.
That's right, because you could stretch it out and include a flat spot, or or you can make it really short and say, whoa, that little 4-foot section is a 1-to-1 slope, and you're not gonna build it.
This is a really interesting discussion. I didn't think it was as nuanced as this, and I don't know what models you'll come up with, but if you want.
Well, the subdivision regs does have a definition, it's 15%. So
15%, you can, that is, I kind of looked, that's the one place that I was running into the most trouble in all my work. It's a slope regulation, because it's so difficult and it's so impractical to say, you're not gonna build on 15% slope. Like, that is, you'd be amazed what how gentle 15% is.
The forestry world, the recent standard that was adopted was 35%, and the state provided mapping for that. And it's across quite wide areas, right? So it was like a LiDAR pixel analysis, and then it must have been that there had to have been so many pixels adjacent of that match slope. I'm sure somebody somewhere has exactly how that analysis was performed.
what did how are they using that?
They're using that within the forestry world to evaluate whether or not something is considered productive or non-productive for forest access.
So the software can analyze the distance between contours and just give you where whatever slope you put in, whatever slope you want.
Yeah.
You can go find it. It would generate an analysis.
The goal would be to assist citizen planners, DBR members, in trying to evaluate the reasonableness of a development plan. And that's when it becomes pretty challenging, because, you are a professional, with all your design background, and in your mind, it's, there are opportunities, and so this is really challenging. And if you have, you've come across something that we think is a good reference that we could incorporate, wouldn't want to just grab an overly restrictive rate, but by the same token, I think that we did eliminate reference to slope from our document in one of our editing sessions because it was
Undefined.
was
Yeah.
a bit a mess. So I'd like to get something back in there that's appropriate. Maybe it's broad, that talks about the ways in which you evaluate impact on slopes, but I think we need to have something.
Yeah, I mean, having visited and driven through towns that presumably don't have restrictions, right? We've all been on the road. I can think of 2 of them in Halifax, and I'm like,
Mhm.
how is it possible that anybody approved the existence of this road, right? It spends 90% of its year either washboarded or unclimbable with 4-wheel drive with snow tires. So one would hope that there was something that prevented the sort of siting or construction or utilization of slopes for things that were not appropriate.
The, there would be some study, but if you looked in Brattleboro, of the, getting that compact development where you have, you know, like the Brattleboro is defined by steep slopes. You know,
The Whetstone Brook all along there,
you know,
yeah.
all those hillsides that are developable without adverse effect, in my opinion. And you know, it gets, I think the origin of the steep slope sections is like erodibility. And so if you're building into ledge, there's no erodibility, right? Or there's till won't erode. I think there might be a safety factor for vehicles on roads, but that's a different ordinance. That's your road ordinance. And that's pretty common to limit it to 15%. The state has driveways allows them up to 15%, but that's it. But restricting building on steep slopes is inadvised or ill-advised, in my opinion, really ill-advised.
You don't think sometimes when you're driving through Brattleboro and you're coming down from like exit 2 towards the downtown area, sort of the back way, and during certain times of the year, you can see into the backyards of those buildings that are,
Hanging nothing.
yeah, and you think to yourself like, well, that might have looked like a good place at the time, but someday it's going to cost somebody a tremendous amount of heartache and lost value when their house finds its way to the bottom of that gully. And with our sort of increased storm regime that the state and the world is experiencing at this moment in time, I can't imagine that we can anticipate soils that had stayed in place for extremely long periods of time are going to continue to stay in place. So we lose vegetation, we start to see more extreme storm events. I think we need to anticipate that there could be changes to what we think of as being stable soils or what we think of as being stable vegetation.
Now, certainly Hurricane Irene helped us understand some of that because there were things that slid and fell apart that never had because of saturation
Yeah.
of soil.
Asheville, North Carolina just experienced that.
Right,
Their
yeah,
grass,
right.
Because of saturation, trees that were hundreds of years old came down left and right all over the place and down roadways.
The my counter to some of that, I mean, the houses built on Western Ave that go down to Whetstone Brook are precarious. Those don't look like sensible building. When you look up, to your point, when you look up from whatever that William Street,
Yeah.
it doesn't look safe. But is it the DRB or the zoning that is going to regulate whether that's a good decision on somebody's part? If the answer is because it's a public safety issue, yes. If it's an investment, like was that worth your investment? I would say, in my opinion, that's not the.
Yeah, you're right to point to the public good issue, the public safety. But again, as Andrew is saying, we're in a time of, extreme weather that we have not seen before. So I don't think we're going to solve it here in this room right now, but I think it's a really good discussion that we haven't resolved yet in what is going to go in the regs. And I think, Mike, it would be very good if you could look at this both from, a stormwater, kind of issue, just saturation, as well as, what are best practices being adapted elsewhere right now. And Adam, your point is it depends, right? That's kind of what you're saying. It depends on the situation. So I don't know if we're going to solve it here in this room, but we need to come up with a way to address the concern about steep slopes. Like, what is the problem?
The primary concern, we can take one chunk of it out, would be roads.
Yeah.
We do have a requirement that the fire chief or equivalent review roads and ensure that there's
Right.
emergency.
They're passable,
access.
yeah.
And I think that can be referenced by code or by
Mhm.
maybe a little more leniency on the part of an actual individual looking at. the
Right.
actual road. So that I'd like to have acknowledged. The rest of it, I think Adam's making a good point that, I thinking of those European hill towns in Southern California where through engineering and the value of land, you'll build anywhere. And it's quite possible to do that in a safe way. So it's just the erosion issues. So that's sort of.
We're not, yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Andrew, one
I
more
do-
comment?
I Put one last piece into here, which I suspect that eventually this is going to become a legal liability issue. And you could, I don't know what the resolution was, but if you look to, there was a Texas hurricane related flooding where large developers had sold plots of land within areas that were like known to be flood hazard areas, and then who ends up with that liability, right? And so if there is a potential that the town, through our use of regulatory language, could we end up being liable for something along those lines?
There's always a risk of that, right? I think a lawyer will make that argument if someone's house falls down.
I don't think the town ever gets pinned on that, but I'm not aware.
I do know that,
I'm gonna just say, we're not the only community that's gonna be concerned about this, and I think these are all good points, and Mike, I think if you can dig into this, obviously you will, and understand how this is being addressed by other towns, how do we set the standard, what accommodation or framing of it, do we have? Because there is technology, as Pip said, and Adam has said, that you can build. And there's also still conditions that we've never seen before. So they're both true, at the same time in this weird time. So I think we're not the only ones struggling with it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm going to say this is, unless there's any new piece of information that we want to bring on this, I'm going to say we've done this one for now. It's 8 o'clock. So, see, I knew there would be, I think I brought it up. Thank you. Thank you for that discussion. It is good it's an important issue. So I'm glad that we talked about it. So where are we? We want to talk about, is there anything else about mapping? Pip, did you get all the way through it? I think you did.
Yeah, the big picture is so much of it is digital and.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we want to get to forest block overlay districts. And this is, the one that has been taking the most amount of time and effort and certainly got the most comment. We put out the forest block overlay district. We had our first conversation about it at the July meeting, and we just approved the notes from that meeting, where we began to try to understand what it would mean, how it would work. And our first thought was, now that we've got something defined, let's bring in the people who would be affected by it and have a focus group and find out what their questions and reactions would be, so that it would frame our consideration of that further. It's new for Putney, to do that kind of district, a forest block district. And there's not a lot of experience of towns. Wyndham Regional has brought to my attention 4 towns that have something like an overlay district. So it's not undone, it's not unknown, but it's actually still new in zoning. And what you have in your packet is a summary that Wyndham Regional Commission put together of what did we hear from people? What were their comments and questions? So it's this one that has like a little box on it that says what were the questions asked, and you can see what was said in terms of the framing of it. And I don't know, Pip, if you want to spend a minute just talking about what this is. People have seen it. They heard it if they were in the room, but you'll see that there are just quite a lot of questions. Everything from how does it work to how would it affect me, to what's the feasibility, what is the cost of doing this, what happens to property taxes? What happens to, the town revenue? What's it gonna cost to do this? What is the overall economic impact? From a public policy perspective, one would want to look at the overall benefits, economic and environmental. Environmental are part of the public good in addition to that. So in balance, what is the analysis, economic, environmental benefits, costs? What are other options of how you could do this that might maximize those benefits? So it wasn't that nuanced a conversation of what kind of analysis to do. It was a much more upfront, how would this affect me? How does it work? And so Pip and I sat down to try to answer these questions because we do believe, I certainly believe, that if you invite people to a focus group to say, what do we need to know about this? What do you need to know about that? What matters here? That you then try to answer it. And that was our what we said to them. And so we began that process. Pip, what would you add to that before I get into kind of what it was like to try to answer those questions?
You're right there with my thinking also.
Okay. So
Let me wait and I'm waiting.
you're
Shoot.
you're waiting for the shoot. Okay, well, I'm gonna just pass this around as sort of our attempt at a FAQ, sort of the standard format. Just pass those down. And I would say this is not meant to be like a public draft. This is more a worksheet of how would you answer these questions.
But there
Good.
were a number of sort of process related questions that I could imagine an answer to. But I would run up against a more, any question related to the impact on the grand list or any sense of reevaluation of parcels related to changes in their development potential. And I have no answer.
Yeah.
And, Jen, I thought your email was very, very succinct in a couple of the points you made. Where I got sucked in here is when I think that the mapping is okay, I can respond to you and say, we can find good mapping, but it doesn't ever answer the question that at a higher level, I don't think we're prepared, the planning commission at this point, to seek select board approval for this reg because some of the implications of it are complex and beyond the capabilities of the planning commission to answer in the timetable of this approval of the regs.
And those are changes in property value that you anticipate?
There's quite a few of them, actually, Anne. I mean, I think you and I talked a little bit about this today. I want to tell Anne that we had our doubts that this could be ready for prime time, to go into the regs this time. And I'll just say a couple of other things. While there are some towns that have done this, their experience is very new. And this is a new policy for Putney.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
It's new for us, and we're learning about it. The first time that the actual policy was on the table was barely 2 months ago, right? We're beginning to try to get our head around it. Not that the idea hasn't been thought about for 8 years or more, right? That's been true. It's right in the town plan to try to find a way to do this. And it did talk about an overlay district as a possible path. It didn't direct that that's how it had to be done. And as we've dug into this, we've just had a lot of questions that are good. It's a learning process when you begin a policy, and we haven't been able to answer all of them. I think that some of the environmental questions, is it a good thing? Absolutely. Does it have benefits? No question. I will say for myself personally, I believe that forest blocks are absolutely core to climate resilience. They are carbon and water absorption. They're clean water. They're our buffer. And they're key to biodiversity, which is the overall resilience. And we need to protect them. There's no question. And the question is how to do that in a way that is very scalable and impactful. Because you could do it here or there, protect the forest block, but how can we do it at scale? And Jim, to your point, the state hasn't stepped up to say, here are the resources, town, we're going to help you do this. But it's a good idea. And I've heard that when Vermont Conservation Design was introduced, there wasn't any particular offer to provide resources or help to towns to implement it. That's right. The state's not going to do this.
This is about doing it for ourselves.
Do it for ourselves. But Vermont also has a history of collaboration and learning from each other. It isn't just everybody for themselves. That might be New Hampshire on the side. People do try to learn from each other and try to build on those things. And how can we learn and build on something that's scalable? So, at the high level, and again, we can go over the questions we tried to answer. We're not sure we understand fully the feasibility of doing this. We still have a legal review that's outstanding. The town attorney is reviewing it. We did our effort to try to put down what would it take to implement it, like what would the process look like, but we don't understand yet what resources would be needed. We do understand there'd probably be some kind of legal exposure that we need to be prepared for. What would this review do to the DRB's process? Would a number of these come in, and how could they get through them? Do we have a standard of review that they could rely on? How would it be enforced? Now, that's a general question for our regs overall, not just this. I wouldn't, but it's still an issue. If you have a policy, you would want to have a pathway to enforcement. And what kind of budget would we need, for any of that? We don't know what it would take and how it would be funded. That's a good question. And so it would seem, and we can go over more of the questions because you ask good questions, Anne, and they're important to ask about what do we need to know, that we take the time to be able to answer these questions fully. I spent some time with Jordy, what was an hour and a half in your office last week, saying, all right, I want to understand, how parcels and property values and revenue to the town would be affected. Can we go back and look a few years? Because you need more than 1 year of analysis to understand these things and the impacts and who's impacted how. And Jordy said, well, this is a good idea, so except that you're going to spend many hours in the town vault trying to dig out that data because it's not readily available. It hasn't been dug out. So I began to say, okay, how would we do the economic and environmental, value of this? That can be done. Why is the town of Putney, 2,600 people, trying to figure out all of that on our own? Like, where's everybody else in the state of Vermont thinking about these things? I can't think we're the only one that wonders. So could we possibly work in a way to learn with others to figure out, even if the state's not going to support it? I hear that, though I certainly wouldn't mind asking them anyway. I'm like that. Ask for what you need. But can we continue this process of learning that we've begun, answer these questions to our satisfaction in a time frame, but not to hold up the zoning reg approval process because we can't answer them right now. We have some urgent housing questions, economic development questions that are being addressed in the draft regs. This is also urgent, but it's not, in my opinion, quite ready. And I will just say one other comment we had from Meg Mott, who's currently the chair of the Putney Mountain Association, raised her real concern, saying, this is a good idea, but you really need to process this with the town. You need to hear what the issues are, and you need to be able to address them. And it may be they may not like the answers, but you need to have the answers, of what that is. And the public process needs that. So she was not in support of this either, I just want to say. Now, I don't know if she was speaking for PMA or just for herself, but certainly that was her voice. And she said, take the time to answer the questions and talk to the public if we don't, I do believe that we could find ourselves in a lawsuit that would hold up the whole zoning process. We don't need more of those in Putney right now. That's not the future that I want to drive the select board towards. And I suspect the select board would have those questions too. So I think we need to get some good things done and commit to continuing to work on this. But not try to make it happen in the next couple months.
It's not to diminish the need for it, but there are zoning, there is zoning in place already with a conservation district, which is a significant portion of those forest blocks is a 27-acre minimum lot size. That's a pretty significant move toward conservation. So I'm not saying that that's enough and that we shouldn't be doing more, but it isn't like we don't have some protections in place for a significant portion of those forested areas. And also, I mean, as Andrew was noting early on when he starts to do the mapping review, there's a significant amount of conserved land in the stream. Already with serious conservation easements, it's just great.
Yeah.
So it was by way of, not. There's significant reason to be proceeding here, but it isn't like we don't have some protections in place.
Right.
And also what comes to mind is a multi-town view. These are north-south connected forest lots, and we should be talking to Westminster
Right.
and Dummerston at a minimum, about the fact that we're thinking about doing changes on these borders when it's a very arbitrary border. The woods continue, so I can imagine some sort of consortium between towns that are intimately linked by their forest blocks and continuing to try to understand how it works together.
So I want to give a chance for two people who have spent a lot of time working on this, Anne and Andrew, both, who've been envisioning this and wanting this. And I know this is disappointing to say we don't feel like we can push this over the finish line right now. But I really want to just open the floor to Andrew, perhaps as a commissioner, and then also Commissioner Carey.
That's what we go first.
Okay.
I'd just like to say that the different approaches to forest blocks that we looked at over time include Marlborough, Montgomery, Heinsberg, Marshfield, Jericho, Bolton, which has had its forest block protections in place for years. If you want to know what it does for property values, they would be a good place to start. Shrewsbury, Shelburne, Woodstock, and I'm sure the other towns have done this. The problem is they're not all called forest blocks. Some are conservation areas, which allow only forestry. Any house that wants to be built in that area is conditional use. It goes to the DRB, and it's not going to be easy to get through. And I imagine that had been done some time ago, and they have substantial forestry industry going on in those areas. Other towns have different situations. Jericho has a lot of tourism. They have a natural resources overlay district. You think our proposal is difficult to administer? Jericho has to have a whole development center to take care of what they're trying to protect. Shrewsbury has a totally different approach, which is open space zoning. Again, they have, I believe, large areas of forest and other open spaces. And their approach is to say, you have to set aside a certain percentage of land permanently. This set aside open space can never be developed, but on the balance of your parcel, you can do whatever you want, basically, certainly in terms of lot size. And that doesn't work so well here because a lot of our forest block protection areas are rezoned to AUs. So, and then we looked at Shelburne. Woodstock has a scenic ridgeline district for some time. They also have a conservation district overlay. and certain different requirements for regulating both. So in terms of cooperating with other towns who are into doing this kind of thing, each town reacts individually to the circumstances it finds itself in. And I personally thought that Kip and Andrew and other members of the planning commission did a pretty good job to come up with a different and pretty ingenious approach for Putney that they thought would work. So I don't think we'll ever get a coalition of towns all agree to do the same thing.
I don't think so
Given the
either.
different circumstances, and to look for that would be a waste of time. I also think that some of the questions you're asking, rather than go into the vault, you should ask some of these other towns. What was the impact on property values? Is your zoning administrator overwhelmed? What portions of this are most problematic for him or her? So on and so forth. In other words, and it doesn't seem like that amount of research should take that long. It seems it could be done if someone could focus on it and I know that the planning commission at some point did talk to other groups and came up with Marlborough as perhaps the best approach for Putney as well. And they also checked with how the administration of that program had gone, and they eliminated certain portions that were proving problematic. For Marlborough did not show up in the regulation they have proposed. So I think what's proposed is pretty good. It won't, protect things forever, like the permanent open space. And most other towns, some of these other towns like Bolton, are now on to how do they connect those spaces up to other spaces. They're working on converting rural residential sections into forestry sections in order to reach I-89 and an underpass that leads to state forest on the other side.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of these which are way ahead of us. I mean,
Mhm.
this is not new and they're moving right along. I personally think this will be incredibly depressing and disappointing to the Conservation Commission, but I haven't had feedback from anybody because we just found out about this. So I had a sneak preview, and Sue was kind enough to spend quite a bit of time talking to me about withdrawing this from the zoning regs that are going to go ahead. I would propose that we postpone the rest of the zoning regs till this piece can catch up for maybe a couple months. But I don't know, that's just me, that is not representative of the Conservation Commission. I have no idea what they would say.
Thank you,
So,
Ann.
I don't know if Andrew wants to say, and I think it's important we move forward quickly to protect our forests. Because at the drop of a hat, somebody may decide to take a big piece of land that they own, buy it. Or, we just don't know what's going to happen. We're losing a very important habitat connector right now in East Putney, which was originally proposed to be part of the forest block and then removed because the lots it was comprised of were so small. They did feel that it would help to have a forest block protection for it. And it's, I don't know how many lots of them, but it's all of them rural residential with a couple 10-acre lots. So it just happens. Something happens. Somebody dies, kid who inherits it just wants to get rid of it, gets money. Or somebody has a financial problem and it's a necessity. Whatever. But I think these, and I also point out that these are mainly in high elevation areas. And those are areas of recharge for the whole water system. In other words, areas that are elevated are recharge areas. Lower areas are discharge areas. And it helps the whole system to have a sponge in your recharge area, which is a forest. Not to mention carbon sequestration, as is being said by Sue. So anyway, this was pretty shocking to me. And like I say, I don't have a Conservation Commission response. But lots of other places have done this. And it seems to me it would not take long to try to answer some of these legitimate questions that have been asked. And, as far as property values are concerned, I wish mine were valuable less.
Thanks.
Because I worry about paying taxes, I don't worry about selling for a profit. So,
I don't think anyone's anyone's arguing that it wouldn't be a good idea. It's, at least from my point of view, it's as a planning commission member, I need to be able to 100% sell it to everybody who's affected by it and the select board, and do it in a way that I feel is, reflects the best of my ability. And right now, there's some unknowns.
do you have a series of questions that you want answered?
Well,
Well,
let's let Andrew speak and then you can look at the FAQ.
I mean, I think from my perspective, told both Pip and Sue that I saw the writing on the wall. In the sense that when we did the community meeting, I heard from our community of Putney from two tremendously opposing viewpoints of like why they were concerned about this, right? I heard from members of our community that were concerned about this from a notion that why was it that some of the landowners of Putney got to live on a hilltop with their private parks while everybody else got crammed down into the village with increasing development. And then I heard from other members of our community, why should I have to give up the potential of the development of my land for the greater good of my community so that we could have intact forest ecosystems within the community of Putney? Right, so it was when I started hearing two concerns that were not in any way seeing eye to eye, two groups of the community that thought the other group of the community had life at its best, was when I became concerned that this really needed, I described it as a champion, someone who is going to have the time and resources to put together a plan to increase community engagement and sort of rectify that disparate understanding of how this was going to impact the town of Putney. And I certainly don't have that time at this juncture in my life. I was deeply concerned about that. I wasn't going to be able to put in the time I wanted to help answer questions and tie that together. And so when Sue said, hey, Andrew, I don't think we have the time to do this justice in the zoning process, it was not a surprise. I think from that perspective, I'm on board with decoupling these processes. I am, as Anne is, still deeply concerned that I don't feel like we were being that pioneering in this process. And I thought that given the context, you asked like why Putney, given the context of who we are as a community and what we as a community have already done and the nonprofits that have formed within our communities around conservation of ridgeline, around conservation of forest land, I thought that when it made it into the town plan, that was a reflection of an ethos we shared as a community. This was something that I think broadly was supported within our community. I still think does have broad support.
I think it is.
I just don't know that. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time parcel by parcel with the mapping of this.
Mhm.
Dare to say potentially more than anybody else within the town. And through that process, I think that some of these questions are overblown and overstated. I think that as you drill down into the numbers, and you start looking at what percentage of various parcels are actually impacted by this. And when you start talking about how does the town value land, home site versus excess forest land and things like that, as you start to think about those processes, I think the impact upon individual landowners is less than has been
Mhm.
perceived. Yeah. It states, one of the questions, and I know that, just quickly flipping through the draft and not everybody's, there's a question about subdivisions and development and things like that. And the important thing I think that was missed by a lot of people is that the underlying zoning has not changed.
Right.
Your ability to subdivide your land is not modified. Your ability to develop your land is modified only in the location of development, not the quantity or style or other aspects. And so I think it was, compared to many towns that have forged the pathway forward, I think we took a very modest approach. I think we took a very measured approach, and I think we scaled back things from an administrative perspective that had been found to be challenges in other towns. We simplified the administrative process. We provided 2 opportunities forward for landowners based upon perceived effort and economic ability and other things like that. So I think that the reg we put forward has a whole lot of strengths, and I hope that we visit it again very soon, as opposed to using this as an opportunity to table it for a long time. I agree with Anne that I think many of the questions that have been asked could be answered rather simply. I don't think they're large existential questions or require a tremendous amount of data gathering that we don't have
Right.
ready access to.
I think the problem, Andrew, is we're just out of resources. I mean,
And
I was
can't-
coming down to me personally doing this and I'm going, can't do it, and that's not how it should be.
On this.
And pulling, and I just want to clarify that I do think this is right for Putney to do this. I have no question about it. It's more about how is it that there's actually no help out there if this is a statewide concept, that we have to figure this out completely on our
That
own.
doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that part I don't see to be surprising, but I do think that within Putney, I think we have the means and the character of town to make this happen.
Yeah.
And I think we can make it happen on our own. And I think, yes, it would be lovely if Dummerston and Westminster were on board and that this had cross-boundary.
Yeah,
impact.
I think that's a hard lift.
But
No, we can't wait
Yeah.
for that. It's not, I think what I was saying, so I heard from,
and I think
And-
it benefits to
yeah,
us as a town
right,
for moving this forward.
Yeah.
Not just, yes, from my perspective, there's tremendous ecological benefit to this.
For
but
sure.
I think there is benefit to our town, the character of the town of Putney that makes it very desirable. Part of that is the extent of our forest.
Yeah. In the end, if we did an economic impact analysis, I think it would be very beneficial. I think it would show that in fact doing this would be beneficial to the
I
town.
suspect that the forest around those large parcels imbues more value upon those parcels than any value you could possibly take away from subdivision.
I'm going to agree, but we have to show that. We can just say we think that it's going to be that way. I think it's on us to,
That then raise the value of the abutting parcels, so those, property owners who live next to the forest lot all of a sudden have their value raised.
I think the value of property in Putney as a whole has been tremendously raised, right? Across the whole board, compared to Dummerston, compared to Westminster. And tell me that is not because of the character of town, right? And so it becomes very hard to parse out who gets pegged with that particular value.
It's the first 2 acres that.
First
the
two,
rest is-
right.
Yeah. that's
And
the
rest is-
assessment.
And so when we take away the ability to develop portions of the rest, the diminishment of value to that should be rather small.
The full conservation easement in this townwide revale is 90% for the excess land. And this wouldn't be the 90% devaluation, but it would be.
It
It
doesn't,
would spend some time trying
it
to.
doesn't limit subdivision.
It sure sounded like it did.
It doesn't.
Reading the
No,
wording.
the
No,
right-
it didn't say you can't, but it made it much harder.
It doesn't make
As-
it harder to subdivide.
As when I read it, I found it very restrictive. And not that. I haven't talked to anybody who thinks forest blocks are a bad idea.
Yeah.
But it sort of felt reading it like thou shalt not, and I was, can there be an incentive base or a. Incentive would be really hard, but a punishment base, so if you wanna do this, you can do it, but your permit is gonna cost you a lot more, and then. Probably there's a way that your valuation can remain.
I was looking for a hand from Rye, but we specifically avoided a penalty-based system because that allows those who can, and those who don't have the means to
But
not.
it already does if you're paying for a environmental impact statement and these various things, there's.
Our reg allowed for 2 opportunities forward, one of which was entirely based upon what's the right word for this, but dimensional, sort of easily,
You can build around that.
an easy pathway forward, and then that one that if you wanted to challenge it, so we tried to build equity into this system in a way that was like part and parcel of it. So the notion that you could make it, and I mean, we see this happening in other towns where those with means always seem to find a way to get the thing that they were wanting anyway, and so I think, yeah, a penalty-based system typically only is an impediment to those who don't have that financial means. Our goal is to avoid that dichotomy if possible. So,
Speak to how simple this 2-acre parcel that can be cleared is. There's not a big environmental study involved at all of the total land to be developed. Is that part of it?
anyway,
No, not at all, I mean,
but I guess
2 acres is just.
in the context of the notion that I've said my piece in terms of this is being tabled for the time being, but I do think that I hope Putney picks it up again.
It's not being entirely tabled. I guess what I'm saying is the recommendation coming out of the zoning bylaws is to continue development of this and to actually put resources to that and have a deadline for it.
Yeah.
I don't think we should, I just don't think we should hold up all those. Yeah. We're about to do it.
Well, no, it feels tabled because I plan to leave the commission.
Hmm.
And so in terms of my efforts towards this, it was my opportunity to help this become a reality. In it not becoming a reality, it's not something that I'm going to be here for round 2.
Right.
So,
I think we'd have to find, and I say Anne has raised a question whether or not Conservation Commission would have any interest in continuing this, and that would be too bad, but that's their choice. You know, you put effort into things for so many years, you decide, is it going to be worth it? I'm just saying we only began in July to really look at a particular idea.
for
What's that?
sure, But
Yeah, no,
it
I mean,
existed prior to.
a lot existed, but we weren't looking at a specific idea to assess and get behind until July. I just want to put it in
Yeah.
perspective. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of thought, and I think the ideas about what has been put into it to make it work are all good.
So there was quite a bit of thought put into this before it was
Yes.
derailed by the town plan, right? So there's
Yeah.
thought that was put into this that sort of predates
Right.
your presence on the commission or your
Yep.
chairship on the commission.
Mhm.
So I think it may have in some ways felt like that was the first time, felt like it was put down on paper, yes. But it wasn't the first time that these ideas were you know, the reaching out to budding towns and some of that other process has been happened as official business of the planning commission prior,
Right.
and then was delayed while we worked our way through the town plan. It's one of the reasons that
Mhm.
sort of language around this activity was built into the town plan.
Yeah.
It's because it's something that had been brainstormed and implemented prior to it,
Yeah.
so.
Well,
Yeah.
again, we can always look back to see if this idea, if it was so clearly developed already, could have been on the table sooner than July, like
I mean,
January, that
agreed.
would have been, I think, helpful because it would have allowed us to allocate resources to what was needed to take it to the finish line by December,
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I thought it was a large part of this whole grand process, right?
right.
But it didn't end up being the focus or a large part of.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of agendas that were trying to be addressed in the zoning and maybe that was too much, but I'm saying not give up is we just are running out of time in this cycle.
And I understand.
And I think you were agreeing with that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Acknowledge that. Arguing that we
Right.
should not at this, I'm just saying that.
It's disappointing for everybody.
What we haven't done is we haven't worked out a plan to address the issues associated with developing a forest block overlay district. To overcome the issues that have arisen as a result of
Right.
this process. So, that's maybe the next step is we need that list and then start to brainstorm about how best we can address that. There's a lot was put on Andrew because of his map facility, but to have someone with professional expertise that can begin to spit out that data, how many lots, at what percentage, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it's great.
We can begin to come up with our wish list
Mhm.
of issues to examine in the future. I don't know what the path forward will be. My first assumption is that we need to find some money from somebody.
We will.
So
We need a
this-
scope, though, a
this
clear scope of what we're
temporary
gonna do.
guiding process to begin to get the details of this specific rate cleared up. And to begin to address some of the meta questions about the impact on the grand list and individual property owners taxation issues, because those seem
Yeah.
to be really critical sort of, game stoppers.
They are, and there's also the public good that you have to balance those property impacts against, so we need
just
both.
don't have the data.
We don't.
We don't, yeah. We need a much
don't.
more sophisticated argument
Right.
developed or understanding of the impact, and it's gonna take some time and probably some money and consultants. I would
Yeah.
think.
So we're gonna have to wrap, I'm gonna get there, and I just wanna say, we're gonna wrap this up, and I wanted to make sure we heard from people who we haven't heard from, and I know Anne's been waiting to say something, so.
So as somebody who's coming into this process kind of at the end, definitely have felt like I've been learning a lot. And I do want to acknowledge all the work that's come beforehand and the importance of the work. I think it's very important. And agree that it should be eventually adopted and part of the work. What I heard in the community meeting, and speaking as a property owner affected as well, I heard the questions about how is this going to affect the grand list, how is this going to affect property value, what people are really asking is how is this going to affect me, right? And the challenge there for me was understanding that there are the zoning regulations that are already there in place. I think that was not understood well in the community meeting. And once we made that point in my small group, everybody kind of clicked and was like, oh, right. There's a whole other set of things that we're talking about that this is just going on top of. The other piece is that the mapping is, thank you so much for all the work that you've done on the mapping. Really appreciate it. It's so interesting, but it's also not consistent, so you pointed out that there's different maps for the forest overlay itself where parcels are cut in two, and this seems to segue also into the conversation that we had earlier this evening about parcels that might cross districts, right? So that there's a deeper conversation about how do we treat parcels themselves within the context of both the different districts and the forest overlay, and getting some clarity for property owners about how those would work together. And I think that that's a really important piece, that once we start thinking about that and then tying that into, so if you wanted to develop your property, this is what you would have to do, right? X, Y, Z, and follow these algorithms, whatever. That is part of the public education process that will help address a lot of these questions. To me, it seems like a lot of the work has been done already to make the forest block overlay concise, appropriate, easy to follow, especially within the context of the zoning regulations, but we haven't figured out a way to really communicate that yet. And so I would propose that the focus of this next step with the forest block overlay would be to focus on really how do we communicate it in a very concrete and practical way to property owners that this is in fact in all of our best interests.
Thank you.
I personally think the overlay district was really well done. Really effective, the simplicity of the non-effect on the subdivision and the zoning, but I'm a complete supporter. I also fully understand that you put other work that is being done at risk by including it. By, throwing out the baby with the bathwater here, like, okay, so you get pushback and that all the modernization work gets pushed aside. It doesn't seem to me to be so difficult to get the other sections revised and get the modernization out to the select board, get it approved, and then just keep going with the forest block overlay. And, towns implement overlays all the time. I mean, it could just keep running right a year from now, or
Yeah.
6 months from now, after you get it. That's just a political move to keep what the work that has been done going.
And I think if Sue puts a schedule on it, it'll happen.
It's true.
And my other comment that I was gonna make is, the owners of large pieces of land in Putney, we know pretty much who they are. I think they've done a really good job of stewarding the land. I mean, we have lots of forests because of what they've done. And I don't think we should think of them as being, adamantly against what's trying to
That's
be
right.
done here. I don't think we should be afraid.
Thank you, Ann. I think you're right. Not afraid.
I can imagine they would want their kids to live in a suburb on the top of Bear Hill. Or wherever.
Andrew, did you have something else?
No.
Your hand was sort of up. Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments in the room? Because I do want to. Okay. So I think with that, I think that the public, just to take this decision the next place, I think the public review draft will not include the forest block overlay district as part of what we're moving forward now, but I actually don't want it to go away. I want it to still be on the table to say, but the discussion hasn't stopped. And we still welcome comments, questions about the forest block overlay, because we're going to finish it. We're going to take it down to the 100-yard line. We're going to get there, and we're going to do it in a time frame. I would say it's not a considered time frame if I'd give you a date right now. I need to think about it a little bit more with some input. But we don't necessarily have it go away. We have as a companion in the conversation so that it's still on the table and that it has its own timeline and recommendation to complete it with certain things by a certain date. And that becomes part of the Planning Commission's recommendation to the Select Board.
I also would like to have, if people can lay out, a lot of good questions have been raised and summarized here, that could be laid up and on piece of paper, these are the answers we want in order for this to move ahead.
Yeah.
I'll get back in touch with Jens.
Yeah.
And see if he has any time. He may be totally overwhelmed and not have time, but it's worth it, an ask, because he's been very actively involved in this entire thing for some time.
So I think creating that inquiry framework is what we're, talking about, and presenting that as part of the ongoing conversation we're having about our zoning update and just saying it's gonna happen in 2 stages. We're doing this stage now, this other stage is coming along. We're gonna make sure that we heard from the public and talked about it.
If Jens is willing to keep going with this project and really put some time in, he pretty much got Shrewsbury,
Uh-huh.
their entire zoning ideas, you know, put in order and activated, and he's even gonna review proposals which come up. I'm sure that's up north some.
Great.
We would avoid the steps of fundraising, interviewing, bidding, getting consultant, so on and so forth. So I think it's worth it.
If there's a shortcut to find resources,
Yeah.
as the
Maybe
chief
start
grant
with
writer
some-
and grant manager, I would just as soon not have to take the time for that. So Jim, I want to thank you. You haven't said very much in the meeting, but it was very helpful to have the commentary. It was provocative, but helpful. I wanted to acknowledge it.
And I think it looks like a lot. I think the whole idea is that discussion with Karen and other people in the community, someone from the planning committee about how that is, how we can do what we want to see and more innovative for others. You know, it might be able to be worked out in a way that would be satisfactory. Yeah.
Okay. So we need to put a wrap on this. I'm going to just hand around the agenda that I plan to do on the 30th of September, because we don't have another time. And I think anybody can give me comment on this. I would welcome any other commissioner to work with me on the outreach. Again, so much of what we're doing on outreach is falling here. I get that. But it is really helpful for you to look at this agenda. It's going to look like a standard Sue agenda for doing these meetings, but
September 30th agenda.
it's the September 30th agenda. That's what I'm passing around here right now.
When you're talking about doing the outreach, what do you mean?
We have to publicize the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reach, and I will do that through various networks, but if this is the agenda or any modifications to it, this is what I would suggest, is that we're going to welcome everybody at 6:30. We're going to do this at Yellow Barn, by the way. The first time we're using the big barn. They would like to be involved in the community, and so we're going to try that out for this meeting. And do a little process overview so that everybody understands that we've been at this for a while and that we've had this came out of a process, and what we're trying to get done. But then very shortly thereafter, talk about what is on the table. Mike has done a good job, I think, of doing a first cut. It's in your packet, of a presentation that is much more issues oriented versus section oriented. Not everybody's going to say, oh yeah, section 350. It's more about, what about housing? You know, what about economic development? What about natural resource protection? You know, what are these issues that we care about? So you'll see Mike has done a first cut at presenting the information in that frame. So thank you, Mike, for that approach. And to just talk about the goals, what the changes are. We had thought about, because we have 2 public meetings and this is like 250 pages of material, that maybe we should be addressing some portion in one meeting and some portion in another meeting, you know, just because what do you focus the conversation on? But it could be that we just focus it on a discussion of the key goals that we had, which was to make this more useful to everybody, the improvements in the process, the housing improvements, what it does for natural resource protection and what it might do, you know, in the additional part. So maybe we just frame it that way and try to have feedback, you know, in a more way like that. Vanessa?
Just a couple pieces of initial feedback. When you haven't been immersed in the acronyms and the jargon for
Yeah.
months and months, it's and don't have any kind of relationship with zoning bylaws initially. Just a little, I think sharing the matrix would be very helpful. and maybe just like a little, very brief, if you want to build something, this is what you do,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and then this matrix will tell you where and how and what process you need to go through. Yeah.
So
that's
take,
right.
take some different use cases and present
Take
it.
some very kind of building blocks 101 and stick that at the beginning before diving into it too deeply.
Yeah.
And I think that the matrix itself, once you do that, the matrix itself and indicating, where's what has changed from the last round will generate a lot of conversation just as it is.
Yep. Thank you. I think that's,
And is a good summary of a lot of the changes that have been made.
Yeah.
Or proposed.
any other comments? Thank you for that, Vanessa. I will need help for breakout facilitators, so I will be reaching out, and I'll organize that. And, I'll get going on getting this. I do think that Mary Tomford will be available to help do some postings, on the website and stuff like that. It would be good to use the town website if we could. We might be able to. I will recommend that we then introduce the Forest Block Overlay District as a concept that is in development, but on a slightly different timescale, but not abandoned, just giving it more time. And I hope that Jens is available. That would be great. Like your idea, Jen. Maybe there'll be another idea if he's not. All right, any other comments or suggestions? I know this is way past our usual time, but it was an important conversation. I had no idea steep slopes was going to be so exciting. All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. All right. With, again, gratitude to everybody. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Mike.
The one that I had was only partial.
Goodbye, everybody.